Hi, this is Nana Hosenfeld with the Great Basin Fire Potential Outlook for September through December 2016. So just taking a quick look at the briefing, we're just going to go over the recent weather that we've seen, where we're standing as far as the drought, what the fields are looking like. We'll take a quick look at where El Nino and La Niña are. And then we will go into our expected weather for September through December, and finally we'll put all these different pieces together and show you our fire potential outlook for August through November of this year. So August weather is depicted in these two images below. You can see the image on the left is our percent of average precipitation for August, and all those reds and yellows and oranges mean that August was much drier than normal. That's anywhere between like 5 to 50% of normal for most of August for pretty much the majority of the Great Basin. The exception to that is the southeastern part of the Great Basin, so southern Nevada, southern Utah, and the Arizona Strip. We're at or above normal in many places, and that is because we had some periods where the monsoon briefly surged northward and brought precipitation to those areas. Temperatures were pretty close to normal across the eastern part of the Great Basin, a little above normal across parts of northern Nevada and southwestern Idaho, but overall temperatures were not too far from normal for August. Taking a look at where we stand with the drought, you can see that much of the Great Basin is in the abnormally dry to no category. It looks like western Nevada is in the severe drought category, and if we take a look at the drought outlook, that same area in Nevada, the drought is expected to persist or intensify. So no improvement expected across western Nevada, which is currently categorized as being in severe drought. So taking a look at, we're going to look really quickly at how our spring weather is playing into our current fire season. So you can see this image on the left. Those green colors are areas where we had much above average precipitation. And you can see that, part of northern Nevada, western Utah, southeastern Idaho, and far southern Nevada and the Arizona Strip had above average precipitation in the spring. And what that means is that when the grass and the fuels were growing, they had plenty of moisture. And as a result, particularly across parts of Nevada, we've had an above average year in terms of fuel loading and fuel continuity. And that is really important when we look at the summer weather. You can see this image on the right. It's just July for the precipitation, but it's pretty representative of how the summer has been. So we've had a drier summer, and all of those fuels that we grew during the spring have now had some unusually dry conditions in which to cure. And so that is definitely having an impact upon our fire season this year. The ERCs climbed rapidly once we moved into that hotter and drier period. The image on the left shows ERCs on June 1st, so most of them were below the 50th percentile across the area. As we moved into July, the northern part of the Great Basin began to inch up into the 50th to 80th percentile, and by August it continued to be hot and dry across the northern, about 2/3 of the Great Basin. You can see a lot of those stations in that maroon to purple category, which is 90th to above the 97th percentile. So really, as we moved into the hot and dry stretch in the middle of July, heading into the beginning of August, we saw those fuels and the ERCs rapidly increase. And then finally, looking at the current ERC charts, they look pretty, or the current ERC observations from the RAWs, you can see pretty similar now as we saw at the beginning of August. Much of the northern part of the Great Basin is above the 90th percentile. And just to take a little more detailed look at the ERCs, here are some charts. GB5 in southeastern Idaho is currently above the 97th percentile, and that is the top right chart. And you can see the green line is showing current ERCs, and those are tracking above the max that we've seen in the past like 9 or 10 years. So really high ERCs across GB5. That's also a case across GB12 in northeastern Arizona. You can see those ERCs are right going along that max line. But it's interesting to contrast that with the southern part of the Great Basin where it's wet. You can see GB29, which is in southeastern Utah and includes some of the Arizona Strip. those ERCs are low, and in some cases they're below average. So across the southern part of the area where we have seen the monsoonal moisture, as you can see, ERCs are quite low. However, across the remainder of the Great Basin, ERCs are abnormally high. So moving into this fall and winter, could El Nino or La Niña affect us? We hear a lot about these weather patterns, and sometimes they do have an impact on our weather, so let's just take a look at that forecast. So the IRI and CPC run a bunch of models and look at their output, and this is kind of a confusing looking chart, but basically that 0 line and anything orange above that means La Niña. And you can see all of these different models came out with different numbers, but the majority of these models were calling for La Niña. So it does look like as we move into the fall and the winter, we will be entering a La Niña pattern. So what does a typical La Niña pattern look like? Well, this image shows what we would normally see during the winter with La Niña. So across the northern part of the Great Basin, we'd see cooler than normal temperatures and wetter and cooler conditions than you would see during a normal year. Across the southern part of the Great Basin, La Niña does not have too significant of an impact. So if we do move into the La Niña as is forecast, we would expect wetter and cooler conditions across the northern part of the Great Basin. So moving on to our expected weather in the September through December time frame. Again, a lot of maps here on the screen, but we'll just kind of walk through them one by one. So you can see the September time period. These two maps right here, this is looking at our temperature. This forecast is calling for a small area of above normal temperatures across part of western and southern Idaho and northern Nevada. The entire rest of the Great Basin is expected to be closer to normal. As far as precipitation, that's the lower image, it's looking drier across the western part of the Great Basin, and if you remember back from the drought slide, that's the area that is still in extreme drought, so no relief in sight, at least as far as the forecast goes for the western part of the Great Basin. As we move into October, it's expected that conditions will be warmer than normal across about the southern two-thirds of the Great Basin and drier. So this forecast is not calling for like a very cool and wet fall, more of a drier, warmer fall. And then as we move into November, we start to see the potential for some greater than average precipitation moving into the northern and western parts of the Great Basin. We're still looking at temperatures a little above normal across the southern part of the area. And then finally, as we move into December, it looks like we could still hold on to that warmth across the southern part of the area for the Great Basin. And as far as precipitation, a little drier across the south with some increased moisture possible across our far northwestern boundary. So for September, we are forecasting above normal fire potential across the area highlighted in orange, and we are expecting that fire activity to become more normal towards the end of the month. That has a lot to do with the fact that towards the end of September, our nights are getting longer, and with those longer nights, we'll have higher relative humidity, lower temperatures, and that will help fire potential trend closer to normal. Moving into October, we are expecting fire potential to be normal across the entire Great Basin, and that continues to be the case November into December. Finally, looking at fire potential on the national scale, on the top left corner you can see the outlook for September. We're looking at fire potential to remain elevated across the northern and central portions of the Great Basin into mid-September, with some above normal activity across portions of California. Moving into October, pretty much the entire country is expected to be normal except for those areas highlighted in California. And that continues to be the case moving into November and December with normal fire activity across the entire country, again with the exception of those portions of California. So that is it. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact us. Our information is on the screen, and you can also find us on Twitter. Thanks.